Okay, let's talk about Snow White, because there are a lot of people who have a lot of opinions on this one. And I'll get into everything about Rachel Zegler and the dwarfs later on, but first let's just take a few steps back and make sure everyone's on the same page here. Disney's obviously on a roll trying to remake every single one of their classic animated films as live-action films, so it could hardly come as a surprise when they announced that they were going to remake Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It was basically just a question of when they were gonna get around to it. Now, with all these Disney remakes, I think it's fair to say that the more iconic the original animated film was, the more scrutiny the remake is gonna be under. And Snow White is really frickin' iconic. We're talking about the first feature-length animated film ever produced in America. This is basically the film that made Disney into what it is. It completely transformed the industry, and it showed that it was possible to tell stories of a whole different scope in animation. The American Film Institute has ranked Snow White as one of the 100 greatest American films ever made, as well as the greatest American animated film ever. So this is an important film. It means a lot to a lot of people, and especially Disney. A quick history detour. When Disney started releasing their films on VHS in the 80s, there were a lot of people inside the company who were against it, thinking that it would devalue the films. Before the films were released on home video, Disney would periodically re-release the films in theaters. But these people were scared that when audiences could just watch the films at home, they would no longer want to watch them in theaters. And when they weren't watching them in theaters, but instead on their small screens at home, the films wouldn't have the same impact and they wouldn't mean as much. And they were, of course, also scared that Disney would make less money. They eventually settled on releasing some of their less popular movies first, such as Robin Hood and Dumbo. But Snow White was considered to be untouchable and too important to put out on VHS. It would take 10 years from the release of the first Disney classic on VHS, that being Robin Hood, before Snow White was eventually released on home video in 1994. I'm telling you this simply to give y'all a sense of why it's taken this long for Disney to come round to remaking Snow White, and to underline how important this film is to Disney. So now that we're all on the same page, it's about time we get into the controversies. And I think it all starts with the casting of Rachel Zegler. Rachel Zegler is a young actress mostly known for playing Maria in Steven Spielberg's version of West Side Story, and she was pretty good in that film. But her acting abilities don't really seem to be what people are complaining about. No, the first problem people were having with Zegler was the fact that she is half Colombian. And I've gotta say, at first, I too was a bit surprised that Disney chose to cast a Latina actress to play Snow White. I mean, we did just have the conversation about The Little Mermaid, where in the original fairy tale, her skin is described as being almost translucent. But that's just a throwaway line in the fairy tale, and it has nothing to do with the story, which is why it shouldn't really bother anyone that Ariel was being played by a black actress in the remake. Snow White, though, is literally named after her skin color. In the fairy tale, she's described as having hair as black as ebony, lips as red as blood, and skin as white as snow. Hence, Snow White. That is a pretty explicit description, so I get why some people might have been taken aback when they learned that Disney had cast Rachel Zegler. However, I don't actually care that Rachel Zegler isn't white as snow. Sure, there might be a superficial description of her looks in the fairy tale, but once again, like with The Little Mermaid, it has nothing to do with the story. Snow White's whiteness doesn't affect anything. They could easily find some other way of explaining why she's called Snow White. And other than her skin color, I actually think Rachel Zegler looks a lot like Disney's Snow White. And also, we haven't even seen any official clips yet, so we don't even know what she actually looks like in the film. They could have changed her skin color in post for all we know. So I'm just gonna say this now. I need everyone to get all the way over the fact that Rachel Zegler isn't white as snow, because that is a dumbass argument. But with that said, that's not the only problem people have with Zegler. A few clips from some interviews Zegler made regarding Snow White have made the rounds on YouTube and TikTok, and some of the things she said in those interviews have really rubbed people the wrong way. Take a look at this.
What is it like stepping into these iconic shoes?
The shoes of Snow White, the 85-year-old shoes that everybody seems to care so much about.
The shoes that everybody seems to care so much about? Yeah, that sounds kinda disrespectful. Like I just said, this is a very important film we're talking about. Of course people care about it. She does go on to say that this is a lot of pressure and a huge honor.
It's incredible. What an honor and what so much pressure. It's incredible.
So I don't actually think she meant to be disrespectful. This may have just been a bad choice of words. But let's go on.
You know, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story. With a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
Super weird.
So we didn't do that this time. I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
All right. There's a lot to unpack here. First off, I don't really think you can call the prince in Snow White a stalker. He just happens to come across her and falls madly in love with her, as people do in fairy tales. Secondly, what the heck is wrong with Snow White dreaming about true love? I get that it used to be a problem that all of the princesses would just sit around and wait to get rescued, but that's not the case anymore. Nowadays, most of the Disney princesses and female protagonists in general are girl bossing their way to the top. And that's fine. It's great that Disney shows little girls that they too can be badasses. But not everyone wants to be a badass queen. Some people just want to wear a pretty dress and marry a prince. And you know what? That should be okay too. It's fine that they want to do a different take on Snow White with the remake. I generally think that should be the reason why you do a remake. But don't shame the original Snow White and all of the girls who want to be like her for dreaming of true love. And again, the way Rachel Zegler talks about Disney's original Snow White seems really disrespectful. I'm honestly surprised someone at Disney didn't immediately tackle her as soon as she started throwing shade on the animated film. I think Zegler could have avoided so much backlash if she just seemed a little bit more grateful for the opportunity to play this very important role and shown a little bit more respect towards the original film. Anyways, believe it or not, but that's actually not even the end of the controversies. No, because if you look at the title for the remake, you may notice that it's missing someone. Or 7 someones to be precise. That's right. For the remake, they've changed the title from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs to simply Snow White. And we'll get into the reason why. When Disney first announced the remake, the actor Peter Dinklage, known from Game of Thrones, criticized Disney for painting themselves as progressive by casting a Latina actress to play Snow White, but still telling a story full of harmful stereotypes about people with dwarfism. In response to this, Disney decided to change the characters from being 7 dwarfs to being 7 different mythical creatures. So the dwarfs have been replaced. Now, I definitely see where Peter Dinklage is coming from, but I also feel like he's speaking from a kinda uninformed point of view. And I know I'm moving into dangerous territory here because I obviously have no idea what it's like to be a person with dwarfism. Dinklage definitely knows more about that than I do. But I do know that there are actors with dwarfism out there who would have loved to get a role in Snow White. It's really not often there's a movie with a role written specifically for a person with dwarfism, let alone 7. And I definitely believe that there could have been a way to make these characters more progressive and give them more depth without changing them from being people with dwarfism. But this is obviously a very tough place to be in, and Disney has basically painted themselves into a corner where they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. There's not really much they can do about it at this point. And I ultimately agree with this insider article that says that Disney should have probably just taken the hint and left this film alone and not even tried to remake it. Not everything needs to be brought back up and remade. And with a film as iconic as Snow White, I think it would have been a good choice to just let that film stand on its own. Don't mess with the legacy of that film. But ultimately, we're gonna have to wait and see what the Snow White remake is going to be like when it comes out next year. I'm personally gonna reserve judgment till I see the film and stay optimistic till then. But that's just my opinion, and I'd love to hear yours. What do you think of the changes to the story? Will you be watching Snow White when it comes out, or do you think they should have just left it alone? Let me know in the comments down below. But with that said, that's pretty much all I had for you today. My name is Martin Riise. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care and so long.